Snow fell slowly, as if the sky itself felt sorrow. Between the flickering lights of a forgotten street, a boy sat alone on the steps of an old house, staring at the gifts that would never come. The distant echo of other people's laughter floated in the cold air, while his candle, the only light he had, was blown out by the wind. And just before darkness swallowed him whole, a sound began to rise from afar. Not sleigh bells, engines. Stay till the end, because this story proves brotherhood is louder than loneliness.
His name was Noah, 8 years old, yet burdened with eyes that seemed to have already seen too much of the world. There was something in the way he looked at things, not curiosity, but quiet endurance, the kind of stillness that grows in hearts that have learned to expect nothing and hope anyway. Since his mother passed away, the small house he shared with his grandmother had turned into a fragile refuge, standing alone at the edge of a forgotten northern town where the wind cut like glass and the cold seemed to whisper through every nail and board. The walls creaked like old bones each time the storm leaned against them. The fire in the stove fought to stay alive, flickering weakly, painting trembling shadows across the faded wallpaper that still bore the marks of happier years. That winter, there were no decorations, no songs, no laughter, only memories clinging to the air like the scent of pine long after the tree had died. Their Christmas tree wasn't really a tree at all, just a bare branch stuck into an old tin can, wrapped in a string of lights that blinked slowly, as though it too was trying not to give up. Outside, the world glowed with color and comfort. Through the frosted glass, Noah could see the soft golden light of the neighbors' homes. Families gathering around tables, wrapping gifts, living the kind of warmth that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Their laughter floated faintly through the night, carried on the same wind that rattled his window, and each sound, no matter how distant, reminded him how quiet his own world had become. No one came by anymore. No one called to check in or stopped to say Merry Christmas.
The mailbox stayed empty, the porch untouched by footprints. The only voice that spoke to them was the voice of the storm, a hollow hum that filled every pause in their conversations, as though the world itself had turned its back on them. That night, Noah sat by the window with a pencil too small for his hand and a piece of paper torn from an old notebook. He wrote slowly, carefully, as if each word carried more weight than the last. Dear Santa, I don't want toys. I don't want candy. I just want someone to remember that I exist. He folded the letter with the tenderness of someone who didn't want to break what little hope he had left, then pressed it beneath the cracked window frame, letting the cold bite at his fingertips. For a long time, he just stared out into the darkness, his breath fogging the glass, waiting for something, a light, a sound, a miracle. But nothing came, only the snow, falling endlessly, covering everything it touched, like time trying to bury what the world preferred to forget. What Noah didn't know was that the wind would carry his letter farther than he ever dreamed, past the sleeping streets, past the frozen hills, until it found its way into the hands of men who didn't believe in fairy tales, but who lived by a different kind of promise. A promise written not in ink or magic, but in loyalty, brotherhood, and the roar of the open road.
Miles away, at the edge of a forgotten highway swallowed by snow and silence, stood an old roadside garage, a place that time had stopped visiting, where the hum of engines was the only heartbeat left in the night. A broken neon sign buzzed weakly above the door, its light flickering in the rhythm of exhaustion, painting the cracked walls with a ghostly blue that came and went like the last breath of a dying flame. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of gasoline, cold steel, and burnt coffee. A handful of bikers sat around a small wooden table, their faces carved by wind, scars, and stories no one else would ever tell. They weren't talking, not yet. Only the quiet hiss of the old heater broke the stillness, along with the low rumble of rain beginning to tap against the tin roof. At the center sat Cole, the oldest of them, a man whose hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything they'd carried over the years. In those hands he held a small, crumpled envelope, the edges damp and smudged with dirt. A mailman, one of their own from a life long past, had found it near a broken mailbox by the edge of town, half buried in snow, half forgotten by the world. Cole unfolded the letter with the same care a soldier gives to a flag, smoothing its wrinkles as the others leaned closer, their shadows stretching across the table under the dim light. He cleared his throat and began to read, his voice low and gravelly, yet shaking just enough to betray what he felt. "Dear Santa," it said, "I don't want toys. I don't want candy. I just want someone to remember I exist." For a moment, no one spoke. The heater clicked off, and silence swallowed the room whole. Outside, the rain turned to snow again, falling softly against the window like the world was holding its breath. One by one, their eyes lifted, weathered faces, tired souls, men who had seen too much of what the world could take from you. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them, a memory, a reflection, a shared ache that didn't need words. Finally, one of them whispered, barely loud enough to be heard over the wind, "No one should spend Christmas alone." The others nodded slowly, the kind of nod that doesn't ask for agreement, it promises action. And as the thought itself had summoned them to life, the men rose from their chairs, their leather creaking like armor waking from slumber. Cole set the letter down on the counter, then looked toward the garage door, where rows of bikes waited in the dark like sleeping beasts. Moments later, the first engine roared, deep, guttural, shaking the walls with a sound that was half thunder, half heartbeat. One by one, the others followed, the noise blending into a single living storm that rolled across the frozen landscape. The neon sign flickered one last time before burning out completely, leaving the night in darkness, except for the glow of headlights disappearing into the snow. And that evening, on a night when most people forgot what kindness looked like, the men everyone feared became the miracle of a child they had never met. If you still believe loyalty and compassion matter, subscribe to Hell's Road, because the highways still keep stories like this.
The garage lights went dark, one by one, until only the faint glow of moonlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden door. For a moment, the men stood still, silent, heads bowed, the letter lying on the table between them like a small flame that refused to die. Then Cole reached for his helmet, his gloved hand trembling just slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried that quiet conviction only men who have lost too much can possess. "Let's ride," he said. And that was all it took. The engines came alive like beasts awakened from slumber, low growls turning into roars that shook the old walls and sent shivers through the cold night air. Their headlights sliced through the darkness, cutting ribbons of light across the snow as they rolled out of the garage one after another, each tire leaving a mark that the storm could never fully erase. The town slept, unaware of the convoy of ghosts moving through its frozen veins. But if anyone had looked out their window just then, they might have mistaken it for something divine, a procession of steel and thunder, carrying warmth where the world had gone cold. Cole rode in front, the leader of the storm. The wind clawed at his jacket, the night pressing hard against his faceplate, but he didn't slow down. He could feel the weight of the letter in his pocket, a reminder of why they were out there, of a child who didn't know his name, but had somehow reached straight into the heart of every man riding behind him. They didn't carry gifts wrapped in paper or toys from a store. What they carried was heavier, the kind of gift no one asks for, but everyone needs. The proof that someone, somewhere, still cares. The cold bit at their hands, the snow stung their eyes, yet none of it mattered. Each mile felt like redemption, like the road itself was forgiving them for every sin they had ever committed, every mistake they'd made, every person they'd lost. The engines became their prayers, deep, relentless, echoing through the sleeping streets. And though the world saw them as outlaws, tonight they were something else entirely. They were guardians of a promise, protectors of a child's hope, riders bound not by blood, but by something far stronger, the choice to show up when no one else would. As they crossed the bridge leading out of town, Cole looked up at the sky, heavy with clouds, yet faintly lit by the reflection of their lights below. Snowflakes swirled in their wake, glowing like ashes from a dying fire. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not nostalgia, but peace. The kind that comes when you remember who you are and why you started riding in the first place. Because out there, in the frozen quiet of the night, They carried more than metal and noise. They carried meaning. And meaning, unlike light, never fades.
The storm had grown thicker now, swallowing the road ahead in a white, endless blur. Each flake that fell seemed to spin in slow motion beneath the beams of their headlights, like tiny embers rising instead of falling, defying gravity, defying the night. The convoy rode in silence, engines humming low and steady, their breath visible inside the helmets, a dozen men moving as one heartbeat across the frozen dark. Cole felt the weight of the letter pressing against his chest through his jacket, as if the paper itself carried a pulse, as if the words written by that child had somehow reached deeper than any prayer ever could. He knew that what they were doing wasn't charity, wasn't penance, wasn't an act to be spoken about later. It was something simpler, something older, an instinct, the kind of quiet calling that men like him understood without needing to name it. As the road curved past a row of frost-bitten trees, Cole raised his hand and the pack slowed to a stop. Their engines idled for a moment, grumbling softly before falling into silence, one after another, until the night reclaimed its stillness. The only sounds left were the wind scraping against metal and the soft ticking of cooling engines. He dismounted, boots sinking into the snow with a heavy crunch. The others stayed on their bikes, heads bowed, watching without a word. They didn't need one. Cole walked toward the shoulder of the road, where the snow met the gravel, his breath coming out in long visible clouds that drifted away like smoke from a dying fire. He pulled off one glove, his hand raw and scarred from years of wrenching steel and gripping handlebars. From the inside pocket of his leather jacket, he drew out a small weathered patch, the club's emblem. Edges frayed, the colors dulled by time and rain and too many roads. He looked at it under the pale glow of the streetlight, his reflection faintly visible in the ice. A man who had carried both mistakes and meaning for longer than he cared to remember. That patch wasn't just a symbol, it was a story of loyalty paid in scars, of brothers buried and brothers still riding. And in that moment, as the snow gathered in his beard and the cold burned his skin, Cole realized something he hadn't felt in years, that even the hardest roads could lead back to grace.
From the saddlebag of his bike, he took a small box wrapped in brown paper. No ribbons, no glitter, just twine tied in a single knot. He placed the patch gently on top, his gloved hand pressing it down like a seal. Then he whispered into the wind, the words quiet but heavy, meant for no one and everyone at once. For little Noah, he murmured, from those who still believe in miracles. Behind him, the others watched, the snow reflecting in their visors like candlelight. Not one of them spoke, yet the silence between them said everything, about who they were, about what they'd lost, and about why they still rode. They weren't saints, they weren't saviors. They were men carrying the kind of faith that doesn't belong in churches, the kind you find on the open road, under the rain, between the hum of engines and the ghosts of old regrets. Cole turned back toward his bike and slid the letter into the box, sealing it shut beneath the patch. He climbed on, the leather creaking softly, and glanced over his shoulder at the brothers waiting behind him. Figures half human, half shadow, bound together by something that didn't need words. They wore their colors like armor, symbols of loyalty stitched in leather. You can carry that same spirit. The official Hell's Road gear is linked below for those who live by the code.
Midnight. The kind of midnight that swallows sound and thought, where every breath turns to smoke and every heartbeat echoes against the walls of an empty world. Snow drifted softly through the frozen air, each flake illuminated by the pale reflection of the moon. A quiet storm that made the night feel endless and untouched, as if time itself had stopped just to listen. Inside the small, creaking house at the edge of town, a boy slept, curled beneath a thin blanket, the glow of a dying candle flickering across his face, the air so cold it made his breath shimmer like glass. For hours he had waited by the window, staring into the dark until his eyes could no longer stay open, hoping that maybe this year something, anything would change. But the world had stayed silent, as it always did. And so Noah had drifted into dreams shaped by hunger and loneliness, clutching a pillow instead of a person, a hope instead of a promise. Then, somewhere beyond the hills, it began, faint at first, a murmur beneath the wind, almost indistinguishable from the sigh of the earth itself. A low vibration rolled across the frozen fields, slow, heavy, growing louder, fuller, alive. It wasn't music. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't carolers walking door to door under tinsel and light. It was something older, something raw, the deep, unwavering thunder of engines cutting through the dark. The sound grew, swelling like a storm breaking over the horizon, shaking the window panes, rattling the walls, filling every quiet corner that sorrow had claimed. Noah stirred in his sleep, his small body trembling as if his heart recognized what his mind could not. He blinked, eyes wide and startled, his breath fogging the glass as he crawled to the window and peered outside. And there, through the curtain of snow, he saw them. Lights. Dozens of them. Headlights cutting through the white night like a moving constellation, steady and sure, glowing gold against the dark, not chaotic, not loud, but rhythmic, like a song written in steel and devotion. He pressed his hand against the window, leaving a print on the frost, unable to move, unable to believe. The sound of engines filled the narrow street, echoing off the houses, shaking loose the silence that had hung there for too long. Then came the figures, silhouettes of men in heavy jackets and leather, their patches catching the moonlight, their faces hidden, but their purpose clear. They lined the street in stillness, the snow gathering on their shoulders, the glow of the headlights wrapping around them like a halo of fire and ice. Noah's small hand trembled as he reached for the latch, pushed open the door, and stepped barefoot into the cold. The air hit him like a wave, sharp and biting, but he didn't flinch. The world around him was quiet, except for the soft hum of idling engines and the whisper of snow falling against metal. He stood in the doorway, a single figure framed by light and darkness, until one man began to walk toward him, slow, steady, boots crunching over the ice, breath thick in the frozen air. Cole, the leader of the pack, the man whose eyes carried both grief and grace, stopped a few feet away, his face half hidden beneath his helmet, his beard speckled with frost. In his hands he carried a small box wrapped in brown paper, the edges creased, the twine tied in a simple knot. The snow fell between them, settling gently on the box, on the ground, on their shoulders, until it felt like even the night was holding its breath.
Cole crouched down so he could meet the boy's eyes, and in that moment, something passed between them, something wordless, ancient, and pure. He spoke quietly, his voice low and rough, the kind of tone that carries not command, but understanding. "Merry Christmas, kid. No one should spend this night alone." The words broke something inside Noah, not in pain, but in release. His eyes filled, not with disbelief, but with recognition. As he took the gift into his small hands, he didn't see a present wrapped in paper. He saw proof that he mattered, that somewhere in the great cold machinery of the world, someone had chosen him. He pressed the box against his chest, holding it as though it might disappear if he loosened his grip. And for the first time in years, warmth found its way back into that small, forgotten home. Cole rose slowly, placed a gloved hand on the boy's shoulder, a single steady touch, and for a heartbeat, both of them stood there in the snow, connected not by blood or words, but by something far stronger, belonging. Behind them, the other riders revved their engines softly, the low sound merging into one living heartbeat that rolled across the street, carrying light into every shadow. Noah looked around at them, the silhouettes, the chrome, the glow, and though he didn't know who they were, he knew what they meant. They were not strangers, they were family. And as the snow fell heavier, blanketing the night in silence once more, the engines rose in unison, deep and thunderous, echoing across the hills like the sound of faith itself. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come on wings or through prayers. Sometimes it arrives on two wheels, wrapped in leather, and carrying the warmth of 1,000 unspoken promises.
That night, for the first time in years, the old house wasn't silent. The air that had once felt heavy and stale now carried the scent of warmth, of wood smoke, of coffee freshly poured into chipped mugs, of laughter echoing softly beneath a roof that had almost forgotten what joy sounded like. The flicker of makeshift lights, strung clumsily along the walls, cast golden reflections across the peeling wallpaper, making the cracks and stains look almost beautiful, as if the light itself wanted to heal what time had broken. The bikers sat crowded around the small kitchen table, their heavy jackets steaming as the heat from the fire began to thaw the cold from their bones. One of them tuned an old radio sitting in the corner, and after a few moments of static, a faint melody filled the room. Not the polished sound of carols, but a song from another time, rough and honest, carried by a voice that had lived too long to be perfect. Noah's grandmother sat quietly by the stove, her hands trembling as she poured coffee into 10 cups. Tears ran silently down her cheeks, but her smile stayed, wide, tender, disbelieving, as she looked at the men who had brought life back into a house she thought would never feel alive again. Noah moved among them, barefoot and beaming, his small hands carrying plates of bread and cookies that had somehow survived the cold. Every time he looked up, someone smiled back, a nod here, a pat on the shoulder there, gestures small and simple, but filled with the weight of something real. He didn't understand their words or their stories, but he didn't have to. He understood the feeling, that invisible thread that connects people who might never meet again, yet will always remember each other when they hear the right sound at the right time.
Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, muting the world beyond the window. Hours passed, and slowly the laughter faded, replaced by quiet conversation, then by silence once more. Not the empty kind that hurts, but the kind that lingers like an embrace. When dawn began to rise, the horizon glowed faintly pink, and the bikers stood, one by one, pulling on their gloves and jackets, their boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. Cole was the last to leave. He walked to the door, paused for a moment, and looked back. The house was still now. The boy asleep in his grandmother's arms, the lights dimming as the fire sank into embers. He smiled, that same quiet smile that hides both sadness and peace, and placed a folded note on the doorstep. The paper fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, and written in simple, uneven letters were the words, "If you ever hear engines at night, don't be afraid. It's just family making sure you're okay." Then he stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. The others were already waiting, their bikes lined up like sentinels against the rising light. Cole mounted his Harley, turned the key, and the first roar of the engine shattered the silence of the morning. The rest followed, one by one, until the sound became a chorus, deep, strong, alive, echoing through the snow-covered valley. As they disappeared down the road, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold over the frozen landscape. Inside the house, the note trembled against the floorboards, caught in a draft from the chimney, as though even the wind wanted to remember their words. Some roads lead to redemption, others to memory. If you want to keep the fire alive, the official Hell's Road store is linked below, where brotherhood lives beyond the story.
and as the sound of the engines faded into the distance, the world felt just a little less cold, because somewhere out there, on roads no map could name, family still rode beneath the same sky.
Days passed, and the snow that had once buried the town began to soften under the pale warmth of winter's sun. The world moved on, as it always does, people returning to their routines, streets filling again with voices, windows glowing with the rhythm of ordinary life. But inside the small house at the edge of that forgotten road, something had changed. It wasn't louder now, nor richer, nor brighter. It was simply alive, as if the air itself had remembered how to breathe. Every morning, Noah would wake before the sun, still half dreaming, and run to the window just to see the road stretch out toward the horizon. Sometimes it was empty, covered in snow and silence. Sometimes he'd see faint tire tracks cutting across the frost, disappearing into the trees. And every time he heard that distant rolling thunder, a sound too deep to be the wind, too steady to be chance, a smile would spread across his face. Not the smile of expectation, but the quiet one that comes from knowing you were never really alone. He no longer waited for gifts or lights or miracles to arrive wrapped in paper. He understood now that the miracle had already happened, not in what they gave, but in what they reminded him. That kindness is the only thing that survives the cold, that family isn't always blood, and that sometimes the people who appear out of nowhere are the ones who stay with you forever, even after they've ridden away. In the evenings, he'd sit by the window, sketching motorcycles in the fog of the glass, his finger tracing shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. He'd imagine them, the men who had once filled his street with thunder, still out there somewhere, carving paths through frozen fields, riding into sunsets no one else would ever see. He didn't know their names, but he carried them anyway, tucked deep inside the place where memory and gratitude meet. Far beyond the edge of town, down a stretch of highway covered in ice and light, the brotherhood kept riding, their engines humming against the wind, their colors flapping like banners of a creed too old to die. Somewhere in that endless white, one of them, maybe Cole, maybe another, would glance up at the stars, smile beneath his helmet, and whisper to the cold night, "For the kid." And the road would answer, the sound of engines rolling onward into forever. Because some stories don't end, they just keep riding, mile after mile, soul after soul, carrying the names of those who remind the world what it means to care. This was one of many forgotten legends of the road. Subscribe to Hell's Road and ride with us into the next story.